Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Not Again with Sandy. Before we get started today, I have to share a funny story with you. I have 8 grandchildren. The oldest is almost 23, and the youngest is 2.5. It's quite a span. But my 6-year-old grandson, Archer, was helping me talk to his mom at a FaceTime call earlier this week. And I was sitting here, which is my spare bedroom. So I came up here, I'm talking to my grandson Archer, and he says, "Grandma, are those shoes behind you in like a container?" And I said, "Oh no, honey, that's the yarn. This is that yarn shelf that Papa made for me. You've seen it before." And he said, "Oh, right, for your yarn shirts that you make." I just thought that was so adorable. Yarn shirts. I'm wearing a yarn shirt. I want to see your yarn shirts. I'm sorry. I just thought that was really cute. Okay, so let's talk about my Leary tea. It is getting closer. I got the short rows in, so you can see this front is a little bit shorter than the back. I finished that section between the last pattern sanctioned increase, and I did another increase just in case. I'm going to knit maybe a couple more inches, and then I'm going to try it on and see what I think. So my third skein, did the sleeves, and then moved on to the rest of the body. I might get this whole thing done with 3 skeins of yarn. That'd be amazing. So yeah, all going well. No more mistakes that I know of at the time. I thought the short rows went pretty smoothly, actually. So let's talk about my next project, but I have to preface this just a little bit because this was the point in my knitting journey where I started selecting patterns based on the skills I wanted to learn. And the next one I wanted to learn was stranded colorwork. Now, if you've never done stranded colorwork before, I'll try to give you a brief explanation of what that is. There are sweater patterns that you can buy that quite typically have different colors that create a pattern along the yoke of the sweater. It doesn't have to be the yoke though. You can find them, around the body, around the hem, on the sleeves or the cuffs. So it's not just the yoke. That just seems to be where you mostly see them. And that's accomplished by taking 2 or 3 strands of different colored yarn, and as you're moving along the round, each stitch is designated a certain color, and you knit that stitch with that color, not using the other strand or strands, but those strands then get carried behind the stitch that was knitted. And so it goes as you go along. This is an example of a grid that you would use to know what colors you're knitting where. It's, not the kind of thing I wanted to jump into right away and not at least do a little research on the techniques. So that's what I did first, was check YouTube for, basic color work, stranded knitting tips and tricks to help me do a good job, or as good as I could at my first effort. And then I also selected a free pattern on Ravelry. It's just a cowl that I thought would be a nice small project. Something that if I messed it up, it would not be a huge amount of effort to tear it out and start over or do some more practice on. So I found a cowl in Ravelry called the Helmberer cowl by Vicki Perkins. And if I didn't print it out for you, but I can spell Helmberer, Helmberer, by Vicki, Vikki Perkins. And it was a really nice pattern, just 2 colors, the main color and a contrasting color. I had yarn in my stash, kind of a stone-colored main color, and a variegated of yellow and green and blue, I think, for the contrasting. With the tips and tricks I had learned from YouTube videos, the knit went pretty well. There was a tiny bit of puckering as I was knitting it, which I was concerned about. The thing to be careful of when you are doing stranded color work is to not hold the yarn so tight between stitches. And I know with my own tension, it would be very easy for me to kind of tug on that yarn that's not being used and have it pucker up the part of the fabric that I'm knitting. So I was a little bit worried when I saw the puckering, but it was slight puckering, pretty subtle. And when I blocked it, it blocked nice and flat. But I think that that's something to be aware of. That's a lot of the tips and tricks I found were all about tension, about holding the stitches kind of far apart when you're wrapping that extra yarn around, or maybe a yarn you haven't used for a few stitches, so that you're not pulling it tight and creating that pucker in the fabric. Once that was complete, I started making this sweater. This is a nice, cozy sweater. It was part of an offer by Fleece and Harmony. And if you're not familiar with Fleece and Harmony, it's a family-owned farm on Prince Edward Island in Canada, where they grow the sheep, they harvest the wool, and they process the wool in their own yarn mill and then dye their own yarn. And they have a shop right there on their property. It's a great story. I really enjoyed watching their podcasts, and I think they're still giving them. I just don't have time as much for podcasts now. But this was the sweater that let me show you the pattern. It's called the Eleanor by Susan Clouston. My printer on here, can you see the lines? I hope you can see those. It was not doing well when I printed this pattern. And so I was thinking I would go print it again, because I think even my color was a little off, so I could show it to you in better light and a better image. But it wasn't on Ravelry. I didn't remember, but I think Susan Clouston is actually either a friend or an associate of the people that are behind Fleece and Harmony. So I can't share the pattern with you. I'm sorry. I even looked on the website, and in all the many pages of pattern books and patterns they have, this one didn't seem to be listed. However, if you're really interested, I'm sure if you contacted them, they would be able to get the pattern for you. Now, the fun thing about this pattern, and I don't know if you noticed, look at the stitches there. The contrasting color stitches are pearls, which worked out really well for this sweater, because as you can see, I chose kind of a grayish for the main color, and then this variegated kind of blue and purple, which was supposed to be a spring flower kind of color. I thought it'd go great with the gray, but it wasn't very bright. So they would have blended in a lot more together if I didn't have this additional texture of the pearl stitch. It's unique. I have not seen a color work pattern that uses pearl stitches before or after. So kind of fun. And it fits well, except for one thing. And this is the problem that I had with it, that I don't even really know how it happened. I would love to hear from anyone that has an idea of what I might have done. The yoke on this is pretty deep, and I am bustier now than when I made it, so it's possibly not the issue it used to be, but it used to be when I stood up, it laid nice and flat, and when I sat down, it would gradually work its way up to being kind of gathered up on top of my chest, and I didn't like that. I haven't noticed it so much when I wear it now, so possibly the bustiness has solved that problem. But I recently saw on Instagram a woman demonstrating how to measure your yoke. And it's a simple process where you lay your sweater down, you lay a straight edge right on the part of your sweater where your sleeve meets the body, and then you just run a tape from the top of your shoulder down to the top of the straight edge, and that's how you know how deep your yoke is. And when I measured it, because I was thinking about, how deep is my yoke, it was 11 inches. When I checked the pattern has 5 sizes. The biggest size, which I don't think I would have knit at that time, had a yoke measurement of only 10 inches. So somehow my yoke is a lot larger than it's supposed to be. So I checked my body gauge. That was right on. I checked my yoke gauge, and that seemed to be right on. So I just don't know what I did. I would almost have had to repeat more rounds. But when you're following a grid like this one, you work from the bottom up to the top, and then you stop. I don't think I would have continued on with more rows. So it's a little bit of a mystery. I'm not quite sure what I did. And while I like the pattern and I would like to make it again, I would also like to know how that happened so I can prevent it in the future. I guess if I were ever to make it again, I would just start really paying attention as I'm knitting the yoke and kind of seeing how the size is going. I might be able to, maybe if I track kind of where I am in the pattern and how much more I have, I could estimate how long it's going to get, and that might tell me that something isn't right, and I can check my gauge more carefully or something. It's possible, and this just occurred to me, that maybe those purl stitches add just a little bit more width, but I don't think that's true. I checked my gauge. It seemed to be all right. So, and gauge, like if the gauge was off, it would be a lot wider on me. It wouldn't necessarily be longer, although I guess it could translate to length. You see, I'm really confused by how this all happened. If you have any ideas at all, I would really appreciate hearing about them. Yeah, I'm just baffled. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for joining me.